take this opportunity to introduce our panelists. Bear with me, these are amazing panelists, so we have a little bit of an introduction for each. Starting with Dr. Linwood Vereen. Dr. Linwood Vereen is a distinguished professional counselor, educator, and consultant with deep commitment into mental health, social advocacy, and community engagement. As a clinical associate professor at Oregon State University, Dr. Vereen's work is grounded in humanistic principles with a focus on leadership, Black existentialism, group work, humanistic counseling, and student-athlete development. Throughout his career, Dr. Vereen has been an advocate for fostering inclusive, empathetic environments for students and professionals alike. He is a proud recipient of the Locke Paisley Mentoring Award from the Association of Counselor Education and Supervision, ACES, a testament to his dedication to mentoring the next generation of counselors. He is also a longstanding member of the American Counseling Association, ACA. Dr. Vereen has also served in the Chi Sigma Iota International Executive Board, continuing his work towards promotion of excellence in counseling. Dr. Vereen's work continues to inspire and transform communities, and his contributions are making a lasting impact in the fields of mental health and counselor education. That's Dr. Vereen. I'm just going to give a little applause there. Dr. Nicole Pullium is an award-winning educator, entrepreneur, and certified professional coach with over 20 years of experience in higher education. For the past decade, Dr. Pullium has been a dedicated graduate-level professor in the Department of Educational Counseling and Leadership at Monmouth University, where she has played a pivotal role in leading curriculum revisions that promote equity-based pedagogy and inclusive practices. Throughout her career, Dr. Pullium has held several key leadership positions, including serving as an inaugural, oh my God, why can't I say this word? Inaugural? I don't know how to say this word. I'm getting stuck. I'll move on. Director of Monmouth University Social Justice Academy, Department Chair, Program Director, and supervising doctoral student research. Her passion for social justice and mentorship continues to shape the next generation of scholars and practitioners. Dr. Pullium earned her PhD in counseling education and her MA in counseling from Montclair State University, and her BA in psychology from Ramapo College of New Jersey, where she proudly became a first-generation college graduate and EOF alumna. Her commitment to fostering inclusive learning environments and advancing social justice makes Dr. Pullium a transformative force in education and beyond. Also, just want to give people their props. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Julius Ford Jr. I made sure that I got the junior this time. Dr. Ford is a distinguished counselor, educator, and leader in the mental health and counseling field. Dr. Ford's academic and professional journey is a testament to his unwavering commitment to advancing the mental health profession and advocating for marginalized community. Dr. Ford holds a BA in psychology and an MA in clinical mental health counseling from Wake Forest University, and earned his PhD in counseling education and supervision from Old Dominion University in 2014. He is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, LCMHC in North Carolina, a licensed professional counselor in Virginia and New Jersey, a board-certified counselor, NCC, and an approved clinical supervisor. With years of experience in both practice and education, Dr. Ford is serving as a chair and associate professor in the Department of Professional Counseling at Monmouth University and has taught at James Madison University. He is also deeply involved in professional associations, having served as past president of the New Jersey Counseling Association, co-chair of the Branch Development Committee of the American Counseling Association, a member of the Black Male Experience Task Force in ACA. Additionally, he is a past trustee of counselor education and research for the National Career Development Association, a division of ACA. Dr. Ford's professional interests includes topics such as Black Greek life, multicultural issues, college students, Black men in higher education, career counseling, addictions counseling, supervision, group work, queer and trans BIPOC experiences, and persons living with HIV and AIDS. His research and work in intersectionality continues to push boundaries in counseling education and practice. Dr. Ford's impact on the counseling field, his dedication to mentorship, and his advocacy for diversity and inclusion make him a true leader and a role model in his profession. Last but not least, yes. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it on to our co-chair, our social justice co-chair, Erin, so we can start with some of the questions. But as I communicated earlier, we want this to be a robust discussion. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, please feel free to share those questions with us. Erin?
Hi, everyone. To start things off, we have a question for Dr. Pullium. And anyone else who wants to jump in as well can do so afterwards. So the question is, how would you approach counseling clients who feel disenfranchised or apathetic about the 2024 election and believe that voting or engaging politically doesn't matter?
That's a great question. Again, first of all, thank you so much for the invite. And I think, this topic is critical, not just for our clients, and we're all counselor educators, for our students, but also for ourselves. I don't know about any of you, but I'm still processing everything that has happened since last week. And still trying to navigate all of my own complex feelings about it so that I can help others who I teach and coach and mentor navigate these. And I know that there's a question about self-care coming along with that, but I think it is such a multi-layered question, because I think apathy in general, we could sort of put that, as a standalone. I think the voting piece is critical, but now that we are post-election, we are left with all of these other feelings, no matter which side of the house you're on, that are loaded with fear and anxiety and really all of these unknowns, some of which we do know and many that we do not. And I think it is very easy, particularly during an election year, if the results were not aligned with the way that you voted, to feel apathetic, to feel as if what we believe in, who we are as human beings, simply does not matter. That being said, I think from a counseling perspective, I always go back to the basics, right? So when we're seeing clients, when we're teaching our students, when we are seeing our own therapists, hopefully, I think the basics are, what is at the root of the feelings that we're experiencing, number one. But equally important is for us not to quickly move to helping our clients feel empowered and feel as if they have agency. They do. But I think there's something about allowing our clients the space that they need to be hurt, to be afraid, to be pissed off, and to express all of those feelings in a safe and comfortable environment, because those feelings are real, right? So I think as counselors, particularly, we're trained to help our clients navigate the complex feelings, but to empower and to show them the way. And I don't know about any of you, but I think when we're working with our students, sometimes it's really tempting, and our clients, to try to move through the difficult to get to the empowerment. So I think as it relates to the apathy piece, first and foremost, let's allow ourselves and let's allow our clients or students or whoever we're working with to feel everything that they're feeling and to openly express that, because we can't move beyond that. I think the other piece to this whole sort of election cycle, even post-election, is it is so much more than the voting process, right? Election day came and went. I was traveling and I was actually out of the country when the results came in. I know Dr. Vereen was as well. We were at the same conference in Cancun, and it was a really interesting experience while we had access to all of the same information, navigating being at an international conference where we're talking about urban education and solutions and social justice, while we were all feeling these complex feelings. But I think it's also about, once we move beyond that, how do we help our clients see that their vote mattered, that their actions still matter, and that this is really about the long haul, right? We're talking about a certain number of years, which could seem quite long, depending on, again, how they aligns with your vote, but that it doesn't stop there. I know for me, and what I try to do with my students or whoever I'm working with is to try to help them find their small pockets and sort of ways that they can still continue to make a difference. For me, I've taken some intentional steps to say, well, how can I get involved in my local community, right? So all of these things are happening at the national level, which they matter, but there's so much good that's still happening and equally important as things that are happening at the federal level, right? So how can we get involved in our small local communities, in our region? I live in Ocean County, New Jersey. I'm originally Northern New Jersey. So moving down to, and I'm fully transparent, I'm a Democrat. Moving down to a very conservative, heavily red county was very difficult. And in many ways still is for me and my family, especially as we raise Black children. But there are so many incredible organizations to get involved in. And I think that's what people want to do. How can I still feel as if I matter, as if the causes that I believe in matter, as if my beliefs are still aligned, even if you have to go out of your town, because people still feel, they want to feel like they have some sort of agency and control over it. But I think the apathy is real. The last thing that I'll say that I come back to is, I will never forget, about 2 years ago, we had an opportunity to host Dr. Bernice King at Monmouth University through the Social Justice Academy, and sitting with her on stage and listening to her say, none of this work happened. None of the work that she has done, that her father has done, and everyone else in the civil rights movements has done, it's all been met with resistance, right? It's all been grassroots. So when I'm like, you know what? Well, if they can endure, what makes our work, matter less, right? So I think we have to sort of take it back to the basics, but it's real. I think it's real. I think it's scary, and there's so much that's to come. But I think there's just still so much power that we have. We just have to allow those feelings, but then help our clients to sort of still find their way in the midst of all of this. But I think it's so much grander than the election year.
Dr. Pulliam, as you were talking, that was beautiful what you just said. There's no more, there's no more we could add to it. With regards to our clients, I said with our students, and the apathy with our students and our supervisees, we have to impress upon them the beauty of getting involved politically as well to advocate for our profession, because some of the policies of 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 that fool that's going to be in the White House can impact the work that we do as counselors. There are programs already that are removing any talk of DEI in their programs, which is some bullshit, because y'all are punking out over this shit. I mean, you really still need to teach what you need to teach. That goes to show that they didn't want to do it in the first place. So at the very inkling of resistance, they pull out. I think that for those of us that really want to teach and really prepare our students, we have to still fight the good fight. And then tell our students that, hey, this doesn't just stop at the ballot box. You need to get involved with the ACA Hill Day. You need to look at your local elections. Hell, run for local government. At some point, I want to run for school board. We need these voices in school board and town council, so that, at least at the grassroots level, there's some advocacy for our profession and our clients, because that's where it's really going to start.
I agree with my colleagues on a lot of things. I was writing some notes and I was like, okay, Dr. Pulliam, you're just killing me to sit that this morning for me, this afternoon for y'all in a really fun way. And so I want to see if I can briefly make some sense in meaning, is because I was listening to you, and then Dr. Ford, what you added. Dr. Pulliam, you talked about agency. And then Dr. Ford, what you were sharing is where do we exercise our agency? So when you're talking about run for local school board, um, uh, get involved in local politics. Dr. Pulliam, you saying the same thing, like, how can I get involved? You're talking about where we exercise our agency. And those can be extremely helpful when we're feeling like, because when we surround ourselves with people who are fighting the fight, then that can be energizing. You know, when Dr. Pulliam was talking about having the privilege to be in Cancun, and I traveled with my partner, and one of the things they said to me, and this was after we were there for like a half a day, kind of whispered in my ear, I haven't seen you this smile like this in quite a long time. And it was because I was surrounded by people who were doing incredible things, some of who I have met before and some who I have not met before. But what they were an example of is where they were exercising their agency as administrators, as teachers, as counselor educators, as professional counselors. And that was just beautiful to be around. And that fosters, as I was listening to Dr. Pulliam, what you were really pointing us toward when you were talking about community engagement is, where do we insert ourselves in the dialogue? And that's another thing we need to begin to and continue to ask ourselves, where do we insert ourselves in the dialogue? Dr. Ford will tell you at some point during our time today that that's going to require a bravery, as opposed to a safe space, creating a brave space. And so where is it we exercise our bravery in this dialogue? And perhaps that for some of us can serve as our energy and our, oh, this is what got me out of bed this morning because I got some fight. Another thing, Dr. Pulliam, you were talking about the root of the feeling, and it's like the feelings. And so when you're talking about connecting with people who have different ideals, where are the places we can connect it? It's the root for some folks, not for all, but we have to, doing what we do, believing what we believe, and espousing what we espouse, is believe that the dialogue and us showing up and exercising our right and our agency can create at least, okay, I could at least maybe come into an understanding how you see that as being possible. And then the hope is that that's reciprocated, that someone who shares a different set of beliefs and values. That was another thing Dr. Pulliam really highlighted, those values, that we can at least sit there and they can like, okay, so those are your values. And those are things that I've learned over the course, and I'm growing into over the course of my career. And this came from a Montclair grad. There's a lot of things I take from y'all New Jersey folks because y'all should be out there killing it. And it's the idea of, being present, exercising agency. Dr. Hannon, who's at Montclair State, I'm sure y'all have heard him talking about being the right kind of help. And a few other folks who I'll get to, but so getting to that root, and that can be really hard to sit with. But again, we're examples and we're models. Many of the people, the students and clients that you work with, their work with you is the first time they're working to get into, be in, and maintain, and then get out of a healthy relationship. So they're learning so much from us. And it also requires us to take some time to pour into ourselves so that we are not dragging, and as I like to say, bleeding all over the place as we're trying to be the right kind of help. Another thing Dr. Pulliam hit on is like, this is definitely more than a vote. And it wasn't just about this iteration in time. It was about all the things that we did and didn't do personally, professionally, and otherwise leading up to what we did and to exercise our rights during. Like, I sent a picture to some of my closest friends, Linwood with his little ballot in his hand, like, I'm exercising my right. Shoving it in the mailbox, putting it where it belongs. And then I have to be okay with the result because that's just what I sign up for because I choose to remain in this country. I don't even have to like everything. And then again, that leads me to something that I think Dr. Ford would share, and that's to continue to seek bravery. Because when we talk about what was said earlier, like, it's scary. It can be scary. And it can leave us with lots of bouncing around lingering questions. And it brings to mind how community can be one of those things that is the best things that we do for ourselves. Surrounding ourselves with people, and not necessarily always people who think like us, stepping out of our comfort zone the same way we're encouraging others to do that. So those are things that I would add. And so I really appreciate what my colleagues have brought and how it's leaving me with all sorts of thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I particularly like that because in all transparency, I was feeling it last week. And I'm gonna jump to our second question because I think with regards to exercising agency, like myself, I voted, posted pictures, but still feeling and struggling with burnout. So what advice, and this is to the panel, would you give to counselors struggling with burnout or compassion fatigue due to the heightened political climate of 2024?
Self-care is not selfish and rest is revolutionary. I know that the night before the election, I told my students, look here. I was very transparent. I said, I'm sick of the political bullshit. I said, I'm gonna cast my vote and we're gonna disengage. I'm not watching any results, I'm not gonna do any of that. And I didn't. I woke up to a shit show the next day, but I didn't. And knowing that weekend I was going to be at SACES and talking about the things that aren't we talked about in Texas schools in Dallas. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna take this time to really just engage with my peeps and talk about what I'm gonna talk about and just hang out. And so for me, being amongst my people was my self-care that recharged me, rejuvenated me, and I got to really just lean into my wellness team. I told people I have a wellness team. Um, PD is my personal trainer. Lala is my nail tech. Luke is my massage therapist, and Eric is my mental health therapist. And I see them all at some point in a month. So I'm just like, get you a wellness team, practice self-care. I went to this awesome presentation by the doctors from North Carolina A&T, and they were talking about self-care and how the importance of getting self-care as doctoral students is. And I love that they're starting that foundation as doctoral students, not only as for themselves, but as future counselor educators and teaching our students and our supervisees how to engage in self-care. And so get it how you get it. Just engage in self-care, get your release, how you get your release, if that's cooking, going to church, or whatever. But you have to be intentional and deliberate about prioritizing yourself because you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Indeed. I'm giggling because I got a text from a friend of mine. It was about 2 weeks ago. And he likes to rant on the texts. But what he said to me is, I just had a thought about you. I was wondering how you're doing. And he said, I wonder if you're in the kitchen. And he said, if you haven't been, what I think might be good for you is as soon as you can, go on in the kitchen and do the things that you do, because he knows that I like to do certain things in the kitchen, especially this time of year. Yeah, we got to, I like to can things that I grow. And so I did a lot of that, and it was absolutely incredible. The fun part for me is I did a lot of that building up to and through, I think, what I feel like were personally challenging times for me during this, we'll call it our election cycle. And I chose to engage by having friends over for a watch party. And I can't remember at what point it was, but at some point I was like, it feels like 2016 all over again. And it was a larger picture. It was cold and rainy here where I'm at, and it was cold and rainy a few years ago. And then I knew that I would wake up to really a big world hangover. Some people were hungover because they're just worn out and like it didn't go my way. And some people are worn out and hungover because things went exactly the way that they wanted. And then when folks were asking for like town hall meetings to process like their feelings and what do we do and what is this going to look like? One of the things that we shared as a department at that point, I was working in New York, it was we have to acknowledge that there are people who are moving about not only in this university, but in our classrooms who are really pleased with what happened last night. And there's where we have an opportunity to engage in one way. And then the other is yeah, when Dr. Ford talks about like his care team, um, all of us don't live that kind of budget style, especially some of us being doctoral students. But there are things, and that's the other reason why I was giggling, because they're just different. Like I can appreciate, and I love a good manicure and pedicure myself. And I was goofing around, and I was talking to a friend, and I said, every house that has more than 2 people in it should own a massage table. And the funny part about it was their response was, we got one 2 years ago. It was one of the things that they do as a partnership to take care of each other. And so when we talk about, I'm talking like literally $120 on Amazon. Could change some lives. That's all I'm saying. If you don't want a table, you could get a chair. But like, what are the things? Because we all have to work with what's in our budget. And, you might have a willing friend or partner who's like, yeah, I'll help you work out some of those kinks because I know you're working hard and you're doing all these things that are helping other people move forward in their lives. And at the same time, recognizing you should be at least top 1 in your priority of taking care of list. Because you go back to what Dr. Ford, Dr. Pulliam shared. When you tip that cup over, if it's empty, you got nothing to give. And there's our burnout. So what are the things that you do to love yourself, like truly love yourself, and embrace yourself? And sometimes that it's simply like walking by somebody you know and care about and trust, and be like, I need a hug. I have way too many children, according to some people, and they are good for that. And they won't ask questions. Nah, sure, whatever. Get away. And then they know daddy's good, keep it moving. So where are the times where you're taking? Because you sure are giving.
If I can add to that, I think we do an excellent job as counselors, as counselor educators, talking about self-care. Whether we practice it or not is another story. I think for me, in order for me to move myself to a point of self-care, I have to recognize it not as care, but as self-preservation. I think the word care for me feels optional, right? It's like a nice to do rather than a necessity. So I think for me, it's about self-preservation. It is no option. In order for me to show up in the world just as a human being, but also as a counselor educator, as a mother, as a wife, as all of the things, I have to preserve my overall wellness, which includes mental wellness, and I think you have to do that by any means necessary. I think for me, I have had to learn to approach the self-preservation piece as a non-negotiable. And there's the ebbs and flows, right? I think many of us wear many hats. I know for me as a parent, that particularly becomes challenging because when you have young children in particular who rely on you for the very basics in their life, it is very difficult. And especially I think as women, we carry the guilt of putting ourselves first because we're socialized to believe that that is selfish. What I say to selfish is, yeah, it is selfish, and that's a good thing, right? But I think for me, it's about shifting the language from self-care to self-preservation. And, I know Dr. Ford mentioned, rest as revolutionary and rest as resistance, right? There's an excellent book out there called Rest as Resistance. And that's what it's about, right? So there are actionable things that we can do to get involved. But when all else fails, we rest as resistance because we're tired. And in order to continue the good fight, we have to pause. I'll share one brief example, again, going back to hearing of the news and the next morning waking up again, in this sort of picturesque environment, but feeling disappointed, but also embedded within that saying, but I'm also not surprised, right? These sort of complex feelings. But I'll share an example, so my husband travels with me. He's also in higher education and he works directly with students. He particularly has a lot of students who are dreamers and DACA recipients. And so this will significantly shift his work. And we're walking down to breakfast to meet some colleagues. I knew we would process briefly as colleagues, which I was looking forward to, but then also allowing that time to just be. But I said to my husband, he was like texting one of his colleagues, and I hear him like talking out loud, oh my God, my students. And I said, for two reasons. Number one, for his own self-preservation, but number two, also for the self-preservation of us as a couple in our marriage. I said, listen, this won't go away. We're here for 3 days. We are in Cancun, Mexico, at an incredible conference, surrounded by colleagues who are invested in the same work, at an all-inclusive resort, without our kids. We have 3 days. When we get back, this reality will remain. And while I know that your work is important, for right now, you need to be present because you need to be able to, again, refuel, take advantage of the time that you have, that we have, so that you can continue to do the good work. Because again, I think we are socialized to believe that we just have to keep going and doing. And I had to stop him and say, what is it that you can do in this very moment? Not much. But what you can do is preserve your own wellness for these next 3 days so that you can come back stronger. And I didn't know how that was going to go, but for any of who, you'll know me, I said that quite sternly and he listened. But it really was about acknowledging that we have to be able to preserve our own wellness in order to continue the good fight, right? Because then we're no good to anyone. And that's also a tactic, by the way, to wear us down and to burn us out so that we don't continue the good fight. So I think for me, it was about shifting that. But again, surrounding ourselves with people who in that moment, when we're not shifting it, to bring us back to say, we're not doing that right now.
Thank you all so much for that incredible insight. Before the next question, I wanted to ask if any of the participants wanted to jump in, if you have any questions or want to jump into the discussion, any thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
Great question.
Yeah, I definitely believe it's a deeper level of setting healthy boundaries. And it resonates so much. Like we tell our clients all the time to set healthy boundaries with work, with other people, but from that self-preservation mode of like we really need to know when to stop and check in with ourselves is so empowering.
Mm. Can I have one thing? Dr. Pulliam, as I was listening to you, brought up something. Two things. One, I was talking to a friend, and forgive me because I can't remember who it was, but one of the things they were saying is one of the things that each of us should learn as emergent counselors and counselor educators is what's your lineage? So the advisors and mentors that you work with, what's your lineage? I say this to tell this really cute story. I have this really fantastic student that I work with at Oregon State. Her name is Colleen. Colleen comes in one day and she's talking about what Dr. Pulliam is saying is how we need to remove self-care from our vernacular, because self-care, and this is what Colleen got it from somebody in her tree, Erica Cameron, who's out in Palo Alto, which was we should reframe it and there should be a difference. Self-care should be anything that's above and beyond those things that we do for, as Dr. Pulliam talks about, self-preservation. Because like going to the gym, if I don't go to the gym, Giovanni, who is 2 years old, that boy's going to be able to outrun me in like another month. And I don't want him to be able to outrun me. And I don't want him to push me to his high school graduation in a wheelchair. So I get to the gym once in a blue moon, more than once in a blue moon. And I try to do those things to prepare me to just complete my daily existence, be there for my children, my partner, my students, the students that I have the privilege to work with, colleagues. And then there is some above and beyond stuff. And so we do need to reframe and rethink how we use our words and our language and what they truly mean for us.
Does anyone else have any thoughts before we go on to the next question? Okay, so the next question for the panel, and anyone else can jump in afterwards, is how do you work with clients who belong to politically divided families or communities and help them cope with the tension that arises from these conflicting beliefs?
For me, I tell my clients and to my students this too, that you don't owe people shit. And yes, they're your blood family, but you don't owe them a relationship. And I know that's harsh to say in some respects because like somebody would say, let's say your mama. Yeah, my mama's toxic. And if you are in a toxic family that has voted against your own survival, you can release yourself from that relationship. And we also have to reimagine what family means. Family is not just about blood. We in the gay community have talked about, this idea of having gay families, a gay father and gay mother, the houses, fictive kin. And a lot of times we've established those, and because of the lack of love that and care and respect that we receive from our biological families. And so your microsystem does not just have to be those that are related to you by blood. That can be family that you've chosen as family. So I say for my clients is that, let's talk about this term family. What does family mean to you? And have them just really reimagine and reframe that relationship for family and and help them to see that it does not just mean blood. Sometimes, I don't vibe with my family and I stay away. And they may say, well, you think you're above us. No, I'm just prioritizing myself right now. You'll be just fine. But I need to think about me. And it's hard to say for people, those that come from collectivistic communities, because in those communities, family is everything. But what does that mean? You might have Big Mama up the street that used to change your diapers. Not related to you, but you see her as your grandma, your auntie. Sometimes you might get the family love that you need from her that you don't get from your biological family.
I'll add quickly, I think, Dr. Ford, when you were talking, I think about, first thing that came to mind was, I think for many folks, it boils down to our identities, right? Where do we begin and end separate from our families, right? As individuals, whether it's from politically divided, whether it's, personal values or views or whatever that might be, how do you exist within within a family system, no matter, the closeness, how do you exist within that system? But also, how do you love people who you don't necessarily feel loved and respected by, whether that's political views, whether that's values, right? And I think that is complex. And I think that's a personal journey that folks have to be on, right? I come from not many, but a politically divided family. I have some cousins on both sides. Of my family who I know. I have cousins who live right down the block from me with Trump flags right outside, and who, and I'm like, how do I love you, dear cousin, from afar? How do I love you because we're family, but I understand that it's, for me, I have to also protect what I need to protect for myself and for my children, right? Like, how do I love from afar? But I think what it boils down to is, how do I exist within a family dynamic where there might not be any closeness, whether by choice or by the choice of others? How do you find that community? Because we all need community and family, no matter how you define that. But again, how do you still feel as if you can love someone who you don't necessarily feel loved from? And I think that's again, it's such a multi-layered process, and I think a personal journey. But I keep going back to helping our clients understand that that's okay. that's okay to feel that way, right? We feel guilty for saying X about family member, this about this. There's no guilt behind that. You feel what you feel, right? Now let's help our clients make sense of that, but then also find the support systems elsewhere if they are left no choice, right? So I think it's such a personal journey that will run deep. And again, I think it's, the political pieces of it, but it's really about, I keep saying like, yeah, Republican, Democrat, Trump, Harris, but really it's not about that. It's about the values, it's about the beliefs, it's about the racism, it's about the injustices that people stand for. That's what it's about, right? Take that person out, plop someone else in with those same, and it's the same thing. But again, I keep going, not to oversimplify, but I keep going back to sometimes our clients need to feel. I have a lot of students, particularly most of my students are from the Monmouth and Ocean County region, which tend to be quite conservative, Republican. They're going through our program and learning about racism and social justice, and they're excited about it, but they are fearful to talk about what they're learning about at home. And they talk about with us their journeys from, wow, like I'm the only one in my family who believes in this, right? How do we help them navigate that? And I think it's an ongoing journey, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. How do you navigate that? It's constant.
It is constant. I was just in awe of listening to you. You brought up something. I did something bold, at least I think so. For I think the fourth time in my life, I gave a 13-year-old young woman who I love very much permission to simultaneously, because I believe there are multiple truths, and this ties to what Dr. Pulliam is sharing. She has my full permission to love me and at the same time not like me. And I shared that with her because that's my relationship with my siblings. And I have 6 of them. Well, more than that. I grew up with 6 of them. I love y'all always. Sometimes I don't like none of y'all. And they have the same agency to be that way with me, where there's still that, and there's where it gets into that complexity. Always have love because we're biological and we shared so many unique and like old people wouldn't believe that story experiences. And at the same time, sometimes y'all be doing some stuff, and I know they feel the same way about me. Sometimes you be doing some stuff. I can't get behind that. And in a number of instances with my siblings, that's been helpful. And then in sharing that with other folks, I do think that there have been some who found a way to make that work for them in their own life, and whatever language we use, but it's that permission to, if a relationship doesn't work, it doesn't work. And Friendsgiving is just as beautiful a Thanksgiving as if grandmama cooked it herself.
I think very well said. I'm going to jump to asking the question for counselors, because I think in this case, we're talking about providing strategies for our clients or loved ones who may not feel loved by their community. But what ethical guidelines should counselors follow when a client's political beliefs or behaviors are harmful to others? For example, beliefs that promote discrimination or violence. Because sometimes we can't choose our clients. So, yeah.
I tell my students this because someone said that they had heard people teaching this. If your clients are saying racially charged stuff in session, you don't have to let that continue. You can challenge them. You can shut that shit down. If they're saying that against you, you can definitely not, you don't have to take that. And I want the students in the room to listen and listen well. You do not have to sit there and listen to your clients be racially offensive or spew anti-gay or trans rhetoric or anti-Semitic or anti-Islam. You don't have to sit there and let that shit slide. And you might lose a client, but while that might even be a client that you able to see in the first place, because once that thing, you may have a difficulty being objective in that situation. So I will say this: if you have clients that are spewing bigoted rhetoric, you don't have to sit there and take that and listen to that. I always work with them to figure out ways to handle that therapeutically, but at the end of the day, you're still a person and you have to protect your peace and have firm boundaries, even with your clients. And there's some things that you don't have to take. And if you know, they're spewing those political views in a way that disparages other communities, again, you can challenge that.
I was reading the chat, and please forgive me and correct me when I botch it. Is it Marcella or Marcella?
It's Marcella. It's fine.
Marcella. Thank you for correcting me. Please always do when I mess up, because who we are in the world is just a beautiful thing.
Yes, I
I
appreciate
was
it.
just reading when you talked about your sister just shared that they lost a client due to political reasons, and it was the best thing for their own well-being. You have to, and this is a hard thing, because you think about who we were at Practicum, that first time that first client didn't show up, and we blamed everything on ourselves. What did I do wrong? What did I say? Why didn't they come back? And sometimes not recognizing that, one, they're not ready for counseling. Two, they're not ready for you. Three, they're not good for your health and well-being. Four, we can't take care of everybody. You can't. But what you do know is you do know a few other people in the world who might be a resource. And there's where we have our referral process. I don't even know how to say it. We just can't do it all. But sometimes we feel that way. I can be helpful. I can do something of meaning or share something of value with this person. They might not be ready to hear what you have, because the meaning and the value that you place on that might just hit a little too close to their heart, where they have to do some serious thinking and feeling, and they're just not ready for that. They're not ready to be open to the possibility that you had a valid point about whatever it is, or thought, or an idea, because they're just mired in their own. And what we do is we do what you always are going to do, is try not to be the one that turns them off to counseling, but be the one that helps them find their lane, their space, and having it be someone who's going to continue to do those things, simultaneously provide challenge, and then back that up with support and nurturing. I've rarely grown other than physically by being comfortable. I've rarely grown other than just, I went from being 5 foot something at someday, and someday I topped out at 6'1". That was the only thing I did just by being. Well, actually, I did eat a lot.
I'm thinking about, I work specifically. So Dr. Ford and I are colleagues at Monmouth University, but for two different departments. Monmouth is unique in that our professional counseling, more clinically based program is separate from our school-based counseling. So I teach and train future K-12 counselors and administrators, but also future college counselors. And I don't know who on the Zoom also either currently works or plans to work in schools. But this question comes up a lot, particularly because the role that school counselors, I think college counselors are very similar. They're doing clinical work just in a college setting, but particularly my students who are going into K-12 spaces, their clients are their students, but when you're working in K-12, you have no choice but to work with parents, family members, etc. So there's sort of this added layer separate from building administrators and superintendents, which I learned a whole lot about leading the academy and the sort of the power that exists amongst all those factors. But sometimes, you know, we see this play out in the schools where we are training our counselors to go into schools and do this incredible work and cultural humility and cultural competence and all of these great things. And there's this level of resistance from parents, right? And our children, you know, in many ways, they exude um, the belief systems, especially at an early age of their parents, until they reach a point, hopefully, where they can start to question and form their own beliefs. And that becomes a challenge. So there's no easy answer for that, right? I think we train, ethically speaking, we follow the code of ethics and all of those things, and we help them play out all different scenarios. But there is, I wanted to just mention that because there's this added layer, if you will. Again, while parents, family members are not their clients, they are directly involved in some of the stuff that our counselors are trying to do, right? If they have to send permission slips home and parents are saying, hell no, I don't want my kid part of a group where you're going to talk about something as simple as diversity, that's real, right? So our counselors who are working in schools, particularly K-12, are met with this additional challenge. That's more of a comment. If there's anyone on the Zoom, I would be curious to see, you know, because I know Montclair in particular has a school track. I'm wondering if and how this has come up as well, because again, there's no easy answer to that, separate from what my colleagues just mentioned. But from a practical standpoint, I feel like there's always this added layer being dangled over the work that our school counselors are doing that makes it really difficult and I think disheartening in many ways.
And kind of bouncing off of the previous question, as counselors and counseling students, we know the importance of nurturing the therapeutic relationship. And in this context, just posing this question to the panel, what strategies would you use to create a non-judgmental space where clients feel safe expressing their political opinions that may be emotionally charged or controversial?
Mhm.
One thing that Dr. Vereen alluded to earlier is my language. I don't use the term safe space anymore because safe space tend to uphold whiteness and maleness. It allows white people to retreat when they feel uncomfortable. And a lot of times people that aren't white and straight don't have the ability to retreat. I create a brave space where they have the courage to bring their authentic selves into the room, the courage to be challenged, the courage to feel uncomfortable, the courage to grow. And so for me, as a counselor who presents as queer, Black, Southern, and Baptist, I bring all of me into the room. And I'm a big fan of Norma Devine's cultural broaching model, and which uses self-care to bring your authentic self into the room. And so I set the stage for that in the beginning, and I model that with my students so that they can do that with their clients and future supervisees. So that way, that sets that strong foundation so that my clients do have that space to, and the courage to be authentic, because I'm bringing my full self into the room.
Aaron, would you do me a favor and repeat the question?
Oh, sure, of course. So the question was, what strategies would you use to create a non-judgmental space where clients feel safe expressing political opinions that may be emotionally charged or controversial?
Mhm. There's a lot of places we could go. Um, I'll share one thing that I learned from one of my friends and mentors. He's a Montclair alum. One day I was tasked to begin to teach career counseling, and the last time I was in a career counseling class, I was a student in that class. And so I called up the good Dr. Tyson Adrich, Montclair alum, and I was like, look, I can't have this be as like I had a really fun career teacher. She was amazing, Nancy DePalma. But the class was boring as hell. And I was like, I can't do that to people. So Tice was one of the few friends that I had connected with. And one of the things that he had shared with me was some of the work that he'd been doing around values orientation. And I found that just to be extremely helpful in doing that early So then we can base our conversation around their values. 'Cause then it's just, we just talking about what you said. We're only using the information that you've brought into this room. And as I've shared with you at the beginning, what you bring into the room is fair for us too, until you say, oh, that's a soft spot or this or that or the other thing. And I have experienced that as leading to moving through some really difficult conversations. Because if I know that this is one of the things on this scale that this person values, if it's in their top 3, top 4, top 5, for me not to address it as a counselor would be to like act like they don't have eyes, whether those eyes can see or not. It would be acting like they don't have those things. It'd be acting like they don't have a voice, or they don't have the ability to listen or to take on new perspectives, or at some point, multiple perspectives, or hold multiple truths. And so I first have to challenge myself. And then it's, where do your values lie? And it's just, I haven't met too many folks who, after a while, won't share their values with you one way, shape, fashion, form, or another. You know, whether they're young, middle-aged, older adults, or in between, or two. No. And it's something that stuck with me. And one of the things that I feel like I've learned from Dr. Nadrich is how to bring that into other classes that I'm working in and other classes that I'm teaching in. So how do I not just do that in career? How do I do that? You know, and you add what Dr. Ford talked about, broaching. How do I integrate those things into all of the elements of what I'm doing? Now I do that as a counselor educator, but then how do I do that as a supervisor? And how do I also do that as a professional counselor? And those are the things that where I lean on my colleagues. And I can't put it in perspective. Dr. Ford might be able to help. Dr. Nadrich is probably 20 some odd years my junior chronologically, and almost 20 years my junior developmentally in this profession. Yet I consider this man to be one of my mentors because he just brings it. And I am fortunate enough to continue to surround myself with people. I think I'm the oldest one in this one thread group, but each of these men in this group, I have formally, publicly, and told them, of course, to their face, that you are a mentor to me, because these are the things I've learned from you. These are the things I've learned with you. Now, what's important for me as a counselor is how do I translate that into my work with those persons? Telling and sharing with clients, this is what I've learned from you. This is what I've learned about you. So they think, okay, yeah, you're hearing me. You're all those basic things. And then I feel like that can be an avenue toward that, what Dr. Ford's talking about, that brave space where like they can begin to talk about more difficult things. Because I feel like we pulled out the shovel early and started doing some digging into what's really important to them and for them.
Yeah. If I can add, I think, we can, as counselors, create non-judgmental spaces without also admitting and doing our own work on our own judgments. So if we are saying, myself included, that we are having a very difficult time having conversations with our families, our neighbors, whoever, with different political beliefs, you better believe that will play out in our work with our clients, right? So we just can't create non-judgmental spaces unless we are continuously checking our own, again, valid feelings, but feelings that exist because, we're trained to, here's what you do and here's how we focus on this. But the fact of the matter is we're human beings. And if we're feeling hurt and confused and fearful and quite frankly pissed off every time we see a Trump flag, you better believe that if you're working with a client with those views, that will show up in some way, shape, or form, even if we don't intend it, right? So I think continuing these types of dialogues, whoever our circles are, where we can continue to process this, again, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through supervision, whether it's just at home with your folks who you trust to be your full selves, to say, same thing that we talk about, with our own biases, right? Like they exist. And again, it's what are we doing with these feelings so that we can show up as the best counselors. Now, I would agree. I think, what Dr. Ford was saying earlier, right? I think we don't have to tolerate the blatant disrespect. That's one thing. But if your client has shared particular political views or values that rock you to the core, that are extremely different than yours, that's hard. And we don't always get the option to just say we're going to refer out, right? So we have to be able to continue to do the work, just like anything else, to say, you know, when this person says this, my blood is boiling. Well, that's going to show up, right? Whether, no matter how well we're trained, that will show up in our work. And again, we're human beings. That's the difficulty of the work that we do as counselors, is we practice from here, you know, our heads and our hearts and our values. And that's really difficult to turn off in that moment, you know. So I think, ethically speaking, as a profession, how do we continue to allow for these spaces and these conversations so that we can work this out, so that we're not bringing this into our own sessions, or our, you know, whether we're mentoring people, it's there, it will come out. But I think we also have to be willing to work through our own stuff if we want to be able to create those spaces for our clients.
I love the idea of being intentional about what we're experiencing while being authentic and genuine and transparent, um, while also be performing ethically. Marianne, and correct me, Marianne, if I'm understanding your question. Dr. Quayman posed, Marianne would like to hear your thoughts on strategies in school counseling, and I'm curious if this is about how we broach and how might broaching look different in school counseling settings.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm working with my cell phone, so don't mind me if I'm going back and forth. So I was a high school social worker for a number of years in the Bronx. So you can imagine the demographics that I'm working with, and what's required outside of what you're taught inside the classroom. Put it that frankly. And so I noticed that while we were doing the social emotional learning, and I'm putting that in quotations because we can talk about demographics and who's teaching it and why they're teaching it, more for behavioral issues and not necessarily for the healing component. Here comes this radical social worker, and we're just going to switch some things up around here. So what I noticed is that there was a huge gap between what we were teaching our students and what their parents lacked. And so you know how you have students coming home and they're like, we want to talk this thing through. And parents are like, get the hell out my face. I got stuff to do. Mind me with the bullshit. Okay. That's white folk stuff. That's what I would get, quite transparently. And Dr. Ford, you're a cusser, and I appreciate that because I'm a cusser too. So I got to reel it in sometimes, you know? So what I noticed was, we had lots of educators who were not familiar with the space or with the demographics. So we created home visits. So everyone had to do home visits, even down to the social workers. I need to know where you lay your head at night. And I need to understand the position that you're taking before you even come into the school space. That's one. Two, we created monthly parent workshops. And so the themes that I was working on with students, I offered to parents. It was online, it was at night, so nobody had to come into the building. They could cook, they could wash, they could do whatever they wanted. I just needed them to log on. That was it. I sent them the PowerPoints with strategies and certain talking points so that they could revisit it later. And that was super helpful. And when we transitioned to going back into the building, because this was during COVID time, when we transitioned into going back into the building, I had older students, so 11th and 12th graders, who were looking for community service hours, internship hours. I would elicit them to babysit the younger kids. And so we have parents coming in, they have 4 kids at home. If I need them to come in, I need food on the table and I need babysitters for these babies, so that they could come in and listen to this good word. I then elicited parents who were supportive of it. And I'm like, hey, you need to talk to this person, and here is a mentor for you. And that was especially important for my trans students, because I had parents who did it and did it well. And then I had some parents who were like, I have no idea what's going on here. And so I paired them up. And before I even started the year counseling students, I always had a family meeting. It is a lot of work, but oftentimes with IEPs, parents will use them as a crutch to ensure that their students get services. And so the minute you take the IEP away, parents are often worried that their students will be left behind. A lot of times those IEPs were given back in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade So by the time they're in high school, they really don't need it anymore. But I do understand a parent's urgency, and I do understand the lack of resources outside of the school space. So me referring a student for external counseling took months, and that's just not what this student could afford. And so what I needed the parent to understand was that just having this one student have counseling was just a Band-Aid that wasn't supportive to the family unit, because this student has to operate in the real world outside of this school space. And if you are the reason for their behavior, then I need to get you on board so you could be a little bit more self-aware as to how you're triggering the student for this behavior. And so it is extra work outside of what you're expected to do as a school counselor. But my goal was to try to get everyone, that as many people as possible that was interacting with this student, on board with this student's plan. Because it's not enough to just put it on this student. This student is still a baby, navigating and trying to learn. So if grandma was the go-to for this student, then grandma had to come into this IEP meeting, along with mom, along with the child advocate, along with the favorite teacher, along with the teacher they didn't like. Lots of restorative practices. So when they were at odds with the teacher, everyone comes into my office. We're not having individual conversations. And a lot of times before counseling started, the home visits were beneficial because I had an opportunity to sit with parents and break bread, have conversations. This is who I am as a counselor, and this is who I am as a person. And these are where we align. What are your values? What do you want to see as far as the trajectory of this young person? And how do we align to that goal together? So now I've established some foundational root, and my conversation with parents is ongoing, not just when their kids are acting up. So when they do the most amazing thing on a Monday, whether that was get to school at 8:30 when they're constantly coming in at 10, I'm calling that parent. Thank you so much. I don't know what we did today, but they're here. They're here. They're ready to go. I want to acknowledge that. He said something amazing in class today. Teacher reported it back to me. I just thought you should know. They're doing amazing work here. I think a lot of times we're quick to call home when things are not going well. And that deters a parent from being involved. Like, you gonna call me again? I already know he's acting up. But if I can partner with you, if I can let this parent know, this caretaker know, because it's not just parents, it's caretaker know, I see you. I see you, and I also see this young person, and I see the gap and why it's there. But a lot of that is me building that relationship first. So it is a lot of work in the summer and early part of September, October. But I think that also supports reciprocation, yes, throughout the school year in terms of how we communicate, and also letting this parent know, like, we're not confined to this space. If this young person's able to meet these goals, and it's absolutely, and we see that they're developing in these goals and they're growing in these goals, even in challenges, we're going somewhere. And so we can actually remove this. And so it's really working with the whole unit and not just the student themselves, which does require more work, but it is beneficial to the outcome towards the end. So those are just a couple strategies that I've used in the beginning of the year to support.
Thank you so much for that. I just need to say, for those of us counselor educators, particularly who work with school counseling students, we have a lot to learn from our social workers. And it always makes me think about how can we as counselor educators better partner with our social work colleagues, because I think while we do incredible work as counselors, I still always go back to, at the heart of social work is the entire system. It's family, it's community. And I think I love counseling, but I would say if there's anything that we have to learn, it's how do we move beyond. I know we've grown a lot, and my school counselor educator will probably come for me, but so be it. We need to do better at training our school counselors on the more holistic approach, because you're right? What we do in the schools doesn't always translate in most cases to what's happening outside of, so how do we do a better job of learning that, in addition to making sure that our school counselors' caseloads are not astronomical so that they can actually do this more intentional work? That's a whole nother story, but thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
I just think a statement, Marianne, there are a number of things that I valued and appreciated about what you shared with us. And one of them is just simply, this was years ago. I was reading something and Irvin Yalom talks about like this reciprocal dialogue and
Mhm.
hearing you having created that real time, real space when, especially when you talk about parents need to know when their kids are doing, when their children are doing good work, when
Mhm.
standing up straight, taking their rightful place, whether it's in the classroom, the lunchroom, whatever room. And I recall, I like this, the things you do, and it just brings up so many unique things. Like and this is the silly parallels, very silly compared to what you've been doing. I told this parent what I coach flag football, and at the end of the season, I wrote a note to every parent that I told them I want you to talk about with your child, and I shared with them what I admired about their child. And
Mm.
parents don't hear enough about the good things that their children do when they're not around.
Yep.
The
Oh,
small things that are so big. It was like, baby, guess what I did I get right about you today? And then what that does. And so like listening to you just drives all that stuff. Um, so anyway, I appreciate that. And it it just sparks so much. And I've learned a lot just in listening to you. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I think another thing, Leslie, if I may, and then this is not my panel. I'm just sharing. I'm respecting the space. One thing that I did note, and I think it's important to talk about, a lot of parents were very scared of repercussions of what their students would share in a space. What's going to make you call ACS on me?
Mhm.
And that created a lot of resistance because for so many years before, whenever they've spoken up about a disadvantage, it's been, well, this is not safe for the kids, so we got to call ACS. And then it's another whole system that they have to navigate, right? And so I made it very clear to parents what was an ACS call and what was not. You don't have any food. That's not your fault. I'm not calling ACS for that. But I thank you for coming to tell me. So now let's go hunt down these food pantries so I can get you the resources that you need. And in New York State, I'm not sure about other states, but social workers, as long as they are licensed and have an MSW, they are the counselors for students. And so for me as a social worker, I'm very clear about wraparound services. So ACS is not, I don't need to call ACS to do what I can do on my own. And I think having a very clear conversation with families around what constitutes ACS calls and what doesn't allows you to make that line and that distinction from the very beginning. There are no surprises. And I would let families know if I got to call ACS, you, and this is not everybody's jam, but it's mine, because I have a relationship with you, you will hear from it from me first. And if that affects our relationship, that's okay, because I have another social worker who can take this family on. But I need you to know why I made this call. I need you to know why they are coming, because we're going back to the lines and the boundaries that we spoke about in the beginning. And a lot of it is also cultural competence, right? And so when I have a student come in and they're like, yeah, my mom smacked me, let me call your mama and see why. Let's have a conversation around that, right? And I would have colleagues who would be like, we're mandated reporters. We are, but let me just get some facts first. Let me be clear, because what I'm not going to do is add more layers to this problem when you probably punched your mama and your mama slapped you back to get you back into place. I mean, that just is what it is. You got a home, you got food, you're well protected, you're not abused, you got disciplined. And so let's talk about the distinctions there. And so some of those resistances are just families who are fearful, who don't know. And I think our goal is to educate families so they can partner with us on what we know and what they know. Because I let parents and caretakers know all the time, you're the expert of this kid, not me. I'm the expert of who they are in this school space, and you are the expert of who they are outside. So let's partner together so we can give this kid everything that they need to the best of our ability. And when you do that, a lot of times parents use your office as their therapeutic space. I have never spoken to anybody about this. This is amazing. Great. Now let's make sure everybody gets this outside of my office. Thank you so much. But really just seeing the humanity in people. And I think that's where we miss the mark in this work. because we've been so conditioned about transference, countertransference, self-disclosure. Don't do this, don't do that. We are all of sound mind in this work. We know when to share our business and when not. Let's be clear. And so how do I identify with you and show you that I see you? And if that means storytelling is what it is, then I will use that opportunity to hear yours and share mine. And now let's move on to the next goal. I'm done.
But you
I
talked about,
promise.
you touched on something else though, Marianne, about, you know, we need to tell our students that too. Like, you can't always jump to the whole CPS call at least little thing. And we know a lot of that stuff is racially charged anyway. The things that they will call for Black parents, they wouldn't call for white parents. So you got to be very, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So you got to, like, you know, baby, you might need to establish those relationships with your, you know, your clients and their families first before you say, well, this isn't cool, I'm going to call CPS. Nah, have a conversation with them first. So we got to tell our students that.
Yeah, I definitely think so much came up for me just listening, because I thought to myself, like, even with regards to like a kid telling me, like as a therapist being fully transparent, that they were hit, my first go-to is like, ooh, this might be an ACS call. And how do I operationalize what that looks like, right? Because like thinking about sort of training and what's ethical and like decolonizing my own practice, like how do I engage in a way where I'm like, I have to sit back and really, really assess this, especially when it's not my own practice, right? Especially if I'm working under an organization that they have specific policies. So my question is like, how do you address those the ethical balance between the cultural competence, what is expected of us in our agencies, and our personal values when working with clients, especially with issues like this that come up?
Going back to what was said though, you got to build relationships. You can't be afraid to be in community with your clients and your students. You're in school counseling setting. You got to build community, and you know, have boundaries, of course, but you know, you got to build community with them, because the advocacy has to happen on that micro level and the macro level as well. So I'm asking my clients, who is in your microsystem? Who can we include in your work, in your pathway to wellness? One of the meso, exo, and macro systems are all fucking you up. And then working with those structures, people, places, and things that will add to the client's wellness is going to be important. But we have to be vulnerable enough to be in community with our clients and utilize that community. Hope that makes sense.
Think I'm going back to the example that Marianne gave about and I know this is not all about this, but you know, the physical abuse versus discipline and wherever you stand on that. And, you know, I'm sure social work does, but in counseling, we have our code of ethics and, you know, it's our confidentiality, harm to self, harm, like all of this stuff. And, you know, our colleagues and some of us included are responsible for writing those codes of ethics or revising those codes of ethics. And yes, we should be doing that, you know, as culturally competent practicing counselors and counselor educators, but there will always be cultural variations, I think. And I know that, you know, that's the difficult part about ethics. It's gray. It is not black and white. You know, so it's really difficult to say as a counselor, as an educator, but the truth of the matter is, yes, we follow our code of ethics, but at the heart of our work, I think it goes back to like, what else do I know is going on? And yeah, like, yeah, mom, dad slapped you. And we also know sometimes, not all times, you know, kids can go to school and say, mommy hit me. And it was like a tap on the hand. And you're like, oh my God, right? So I think, you know, when we're in program, whether at the master's level or doctoral level, and, you know, we like following everything to the T, but then we get out there and start practicing and we're like, oh, wait a minute, right? Like we have to leave some wiggle room, and there's no easy way to do that, right? Like, you know, your demographics, you know who you're working with, you know, the families, and it is difficult, but ethics is gray. And I think that's, you know, ethics is not my favorite course to teach. It was one of my first courses that I taught as a full-time professor at Monmouth. Then I stopped teaching it for a while. Dr. Vereen, career counseling is one of my favorites to teach, but ethics is not. Not because I don't believe in it or I don't like it. It's just not. Sometimes I struggle with the gray from a teaching perspective because there's so much gray. And then I was asked to teach it again last year, and I was like, really? But it's difficult. I think, in my opinion, it is one of the most difficult courses to teach because it's a lot of it depends. And our students don't like it depends. They want really clear cut examples. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. They also don't. Now, most of my students are right out of undergrad. They're still early 20s. They don't like ambiguity. They don't like it depends. Have you considered this? And they're like, what? And they get frustrated. But it is difficult. So I think, you know, we got to learn how to like still follow, you know, the ethical guidelines, but also approach our work with the other things that we know that we're just not trained on. I don't know if our ethics folks will agree with me on that, but that's just the reality of it.
So valid, because I'm so much in the, I don't know, I don't know about this one. And it really, I think it takes me back to what everybody was kind of saying in having those conversations, operationalizing things with your clients, like building that community, and why it's so important to continue to have an ongoing discussion with people. I think so much of the work that we do sometimes can feel like we've had a discussion and it's kind of it, but it's really more such a continuous discussion. Like we're holding the conversation here if stuff comes up, but we're coming back to it and processing it together like a community. Yeah.
I'm just going to pop in and say thank you all so much. I have another meeting, unfortunately, but it is wonderful to see all of you. And as I said, thank you for the brave space and the now I'm at a loss for words, rejuvenative experience. So
You've
continue
trained
great.
us well, Dr. Coyman.
I don't know, but I'm
Always good
very,
to see you, Dr. Coyman. Take
I'm
care of yourself.
very impressed. Thanks. Good
Good
to
to
see
see you,
y'all.
my friend.
Love to you all. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Continue the great conversation.
I have a follow-up question. Are there any specific counseling techniques or frameworks in addition to broaching that you find helpful when guiding clients, not only through these politically charged conversations, but also while maintaining neutrality and empathy?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Can you restate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like with all the challenges and differences in values and political affiliations and intersectional identities and all of that, are there specific counseling techniques or frameworks that you find helpful in kind of addressing those differences in your clients' identities, political views, while also you as a counselor educator maintaining neutrality? I mean, I find it so difficult when my clients come in and they're telling me, one example is like, oh, I had an abortion, but I voted for Trump. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what now? Like, and sometimes it's really hard to sit there and of course always wanting to be empathetic, but sit there and be like, I'm sorry, what did you do? What did you do? And it's like I'm curious about what strategies, techniques are there that I can continue to support, provide support, be a space for my clients, and not not go across the screen and be like, what are you doing?
I love the feminist perspective and leveraging that power differential
Mm-hmm.
in the counseling session for your client. That's going to be important. And just making sure that they know that they're equal and equitable partners in this relationship. I think that's one avenue that we can use, one technique that we can use, to making sure that that we don't microaggress them and that their experiences are valid. I would say, I don't know your experience, but that doesn't make it any less valid than my experience. And so this is your space as well. And I want to invite you to take ownership of the space.
I would add,
Okay.
I agree with what Dr. Ford said. I would also add, this is why I'm also not the best person to teach theories. I'm like, y'all, can we just stop with all these theories and techniques? Can we just talk about the basics and how we show up and our values and humility and just being human beings? Because I think we try to find a framework to inform our work rather than just doing our work. And maybe I'm saying that 10 years in, because when I started, I'm like, this is this technique. And now I'm like, throw all that shit out the window, right? They are some really good theories and techniques. Many of them in the counseling profession are also very whitewashed and rooted in, but that's the other piece. But I think, Stephanie, the example that you gave, I think what I'm hearing is, I'll liken it to like my opinions on how Trump could be talking about deportation, but yet look how many Latinos voted for Trump. I'm like, what? Like what? Like it's the same thing, right? It's our judgments that we have, right? Like we really like help me understand, right? But we can't do the help me understand in our sessions, right? So we need, right, cognitive dissonance, like please help this, like this doesn't make sense. As counselors, we can't say that, right? Now we can, without divulging too much information or the people, to pretend confidentiality, we can say that with our people and say, can you believe, right? Like, so again, it also goes back to like, how are we making sense of this dissonance within the work that we have to do and our own personal feelings? Because sometimes it just doesn't make sense, right? So there's going to be a lot of things that will continue to come up this year into the next 4 years and beyond that we just can't make sense of, right? So I can't liken it to a particular technique, but I think it's Dr. Vereen mentioned earlier, like, is there some commonality? Is there some common ground? We're separate from who you voted for or your belief, like what's really at the core of what we're trying to work through, right? Like we have to really like work to peel all of that back, right? Because it's never what our clients initially come in with. It's never that. So I think the more that we peel that back, I think as counselors and just as human beings, separate our titles as human beings, what's at the core of what we're really talking about. But there will be some things, again, that we just really struggle with, that we need to be able to find our own support systems to just say, can you believe this nonsense? So you need both, right? But I think I don't know, it's like, how do we just get back to the basics? Like what's at the heart of what people are saying, separate from all the other extreme stuff, the disrespectful stuff, separate from that. Just how do we get there? So I say, let's throw out all the theories and techniques. Sometimes it's too much. It's too much.
And in some regard, too old. So when we were talking about career, Dr. Pulliam had talked about career counseling and, our love. Oh, I must say, after teaching it, I'm good. Like it's a class I enjoy teaching, so I don't want you to think I hate it. But I assigned a book by Savickas. He's out of Ohio. And one of the things he talked about in this really little thin book that didn't cost the students a lot of money, because I was interested in saving them some money. And this was mostly in regard to career counseling, but I took it at a broader level, Savickas is basically telling us what Dr. Pulliam is sharing as well. We can no longer live by the things that are outdated and antiquated. And we do this thing where we'll take a model and we're like, "Ooh, let's integrate this into this and then that into that." And then it's this whole little, it's like goulash or like a stir fry. And something, don't get me wrong, stir fry is really good, cooked by the right person, but not in terms of theory. And so what Savickas asks us to do, and this is our challenge, is because he's asking you to develop and evolve new ways of engaging with people. And like I'm not kidding, because I'm the messenger in this one, because I recognize at this point in my career I ain't developing no new theory. And I know that for this profession to continue to evolve, that's needed. And so Savickas is calling you, not calling you out. Savickas is calling you in to see where you think that fits. And then one of the things that I feel works is, and is helpful, values orientation and mindfulness, I think, can help bridge some of those gaps to those really challenging things, because I'm not asking you to do anything crazy. I'm working to suspend my judgment. I'm working to, and then hopefully helping them to do those similar things, suspend judgment, be present. And I do think that that lends itself to more of who we are as an evolving species of human beings. I do think we are still evolving. So sometimes at a snail's pace, and sometimes we take the back roads that don't work. We get lost a couple times because we're afraid to ask for directions. We're afraid to ask the right people for directions. So those are things that I would add to that part of that conversation. And again, you've been called in. Here's the fun part. Simultaneously, you're here. You've chosen this.
Could you add that resource to the chat, Dr. Vereen?
I sure will try. I got to dig it out. I haven't taught career in a couple terms, but I will actually, I'll send it to you and then you can put that out. Okay.
I just want to pose if anybody had any additional questions, since it's about 1:40, we're about to start wrapping up. We do have a list of resources available. We created a resource list for the attendees. We'll post it along in the YouTube channel for everyone. Resources on podcasts. We have sites for Black mental health counselors, Latinx counselors, some articles on cultural humility and how to broach. So we have those resources available. And Erin, I believe, is going to start talking about some of our next events.
Yeah, so I just sent the resources in the chat as well, the PDF, and some announcements for Chi Sigma Mu this weekend in University Hall Room 2009 on Saturday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. We have a social hour where we're going to talk with each other, just network with other counseling students, play some games, and eat some snacks. So anyone that wants to come is surely welcome. And also, I wanted to tell everyone about the membership deadline is next Monday, November 18th, for anyone that's interested in becoming a Chi Sigma Iota member. And just to find out more information about that, Dr. Koyman has been sending out emails. So if you could check your Montclair email, it should be in there as well. And also we have a feedback form. If you all could fill that out, it would be greatly appreciated. Just I'm about to put that in the chat. And yeah, just giving us some feedback on what you thought of the panel and any potential improvements for next time. That would really mean a lot to us. I just put it in the chat just now.
Just want to extend a giant thank you for our panelists. You did an amazing job. Your insights, knowledge, experience is so valued, and we appreciate you taking the time to come to Montclair virtually, of course, and share all of your insights and wisdom. It was such an informative, transformative event, and we just appreciate you so much for coming and being a part of this experience.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been an absolute privilege and pleasure. Someday I hope to get back to Montclair physically.
Thank you all so much for
Thank you
allowing us to
all.
be a part of this space and to sharing this community with us. It was a healing space and an inspirational space, and so I appreciate you.
Thank you all. I knew it would be a good time with Dr. Vereen and Ford.
I have one more thing to add. I think it was you, Marianne. And a part of your narrative today, you talked about storytelling and the art of storytelling. See, sometimes I listen. One of the things that it's really important that you know is that I try to take and make opportunities to learn and take away things. So my partner will always say, well, what are your takeaways? So when I leave this, they'll ask me, okay, so yeah, you did all that stuff, but what were your takeaways? And the joy for me is that this becomes something that I get to share with other students that I work with. And so they'll never meet Marianne, but they'll hear a story about you and what you shared and what some of the things that they can be doing. Some of them may never meet Dr. Pullium, but they'll hear about what I learned from Dr. Pullium and how to reframe self-care and like removing that and making it what it really is. They'll continue to learn or hear what I've learned from Dr. Ford, even though some of them, well, Dr. Ford knows everybody. So they're all going to meet him because he knows everybody. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, it's through CSI, I mentor. They're a CFA at a different institution. Like, oh, I was at SACES, and I said, so what's something that stood out for you? I met Dr. Ford. That was the second thing they said.
You mean everybody knows Dr. Ford?
Yes, and the other way around, he knows everybody.
Yes.
And he got a story about everybody too. So, those are things that I'll continue. And then the things that because I always take notes, and the things that I drew from the chat, these are things that are going to continue to inform how I do the work that I think I do. So I appreciate the opportunity not only to be with you, but to learn with you and to learn from you.
I want to add that there was some additional resources posed in the chat, which we will add to the resource list. So thank you so much for adding that. Just going to stop the recording.